Welcome to the American Dialectic. We are here today with Joe and myself, Jake. We also have a guest with us today. His name is Brandon Wittry, and he is a minarchist. Hello, Brandon.
All right, how are you guys doing today?
Oh, doing pretty good,
Doing
pretty good.
fantastic.
And so, what is the difference between minarchism and, say, anarcho capitalism or anarcho communism? Which one would be more related to minarchism?
Well, it's definitely closer to anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism is basically the belief that we should have no government, that we should follow the non-aggression principle, which is basically don't harm other. The simplest version is don't harm others until they've harmed you, and then only use reciprocal force, only defend yourself, for example. It believes in free markets, accumulation of capital, including various different currencies. So, an anarcho capitalist system might include Bitcoin, Ethereum, various paper currencies, metal markets, different types of economies. As to anarcho communists who want to abolish currency and have worker control over the means of production. Minarchism differentiates itself from anarcho capitalism in that there is going to be a security state to enforce contracts, to protect from foreign invaders, and in my view, should probably protect the people from certain externalities. If, for example, corporations are going to dump things into a local river, I think that security is going to be necessary.
Alrighty. So, really, what minarchism is elimination of as much of the state as possible, minus contract enforcement and elimination of negative externalities.
Correct. Absolutely.
Small government, free markets.
Yeah, I think that would be the simplest way to explain it. The thing that a lot of the ANCAP say is they think that private businesses could take care of those issues as well, security concerns. My argument is that in order to have a society function, you would need a third party arbiter that everyone within a geographic area would agree to. So, for example, Jacob, like if you and I were to get into a physical altercation and no one knew who was at fault, we both got hurt. We both called private security firms under anarcho capitalism. Those security firms both funded different arbitration firms. Well, neither of us would naturally accept the authority of the opposite arbitration firm because we would have no incentive. They would have no incentive to side with the other client, especially if we provided them with, you know, an excess of funding. If we were the wealthiest people in this particular Ancapistan world, I can't see how you would have different arbiters that would be accepted. Now, some ANCAPs have said, well, there could be many different arbiters that all of these private security firms within a geographic area accept. My argument is, what is the functional difference then of those arbiters? How would those arbiters be able to edge each other out in a kind of market competition if everyone accepts them as viable? If everyone doesn't accept them as viable, then you're going to have violence, you're going to have bloodshed, you're going to have, potential corruption to a far greater degree than we see currently with the state. They're going to, like they say, they're going to follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And how would minarchism deal with, say, military matters?
Yeah, and I think that speaks directly to the conflict resolution. Within a given geographic area, people will want to fund, certain different security companies, perhaps. I think those companies will eventually work together. They will form a kind of security apparatus that resembles the military that we have now. And I think that will ultimately be what people use and rely on to defend themselves from foreign invasion. The minarchism will essentially won't be exactly anarchy, but it'll be closer to the anarcho-capitalist world. I just can't fathom how you would deal with, for example, an entire nation coming over and having a bunch of different security firms that might jockey for positions against each other. People want to be philosophically and morally correct, but they don't want to have the practical approach. I think a lot of times when you talk about anarchists, they don't want to deal with the fact that people want security. There's the famous Benjamin Franklin quote. I think it goes something like, for those who would sacrifice liberty for some security will get neither. I think that may be true, but I think that they underestimate people's desire to feel safe in their own bed at night. They want something that they can at least rely on, albeit, it having its own corruptions. Not to say our current U.S. legal system is perfect. It's far from it. It needs a lot of reforms. But that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Alrighty.
Fascinating.
So, a lot of anarcho positions have strong differences on opinions of what land can be used for. May it be collectively owned or privately owned or publicly owned. How do minarchists handle this?
Well, I think that the minarchists and the anarcho-capitalists have the same kind of Lockean view of property, where you can't just walk up to the ocean and say, this is my ocean. I can't say, this is Brandon Wittry's ocean. I own the ocean. You have to put labor into land that you use. You have to be utilizing the land. I think after a certain amount of time, if a house has been vacant, other people, they can come. If they fix up the house, build it up, they can claim it. There can be different contract laws. There can be different private contract firms that deal with, okay, we'll help you build this house or we'll provide you funds, but you have to upkeep the house, for X amount of years. If a house has been abandoned, I think this is where the ANCOM argument typically comes in, where they say, well, look at all this absentee property that people have, they never use, and then we have people starving on the streets and stuff. So I think certain contracts would need to be a part of this system for sure. Societal contracts, and that's where the minarchist government would come in to enforce those contracts.
And in minarchism, what would be the primary roles of the government? We mentioned that it's a pretty limited government. What would be something that, yes, it's okay for the government to go ahead and take care
of? Like I said, I would say for arbitration, for security concerns, say that's pretty much it. I think the free market, as we get more and more information, we can learn to boycott certain companies that are using pollutants. We can have cleaner, safer energy. I think a lot of the roles of the government right now, welfare, things like that, I think that private charities can take care of. I think that's where I stand on the philosophical position. I think that is the correct thing instead of using force. The argument the ANCAP say is taxation is theft. I think that may be correct, but I think that in a certain geographic area, it may be a necessary thing to collect some revenue or voluntary revenue if you want to live in an area. I think the problem with a lot of states right now is they'll try to tax you even when you try to leave. Like, in some sense, we already have a kind of state like that, that then adds on their additional rules. But the problem is you get taxed even when you try to leave a country. They come after you for your assets and stuff. So people say, oh, if you don't like it, just leave, And I think for a lot of people, that's also not an option. They, have family support networks, people with disabilities, young kids. Like, it's really hard to just pack up your things and get out of the country.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, very much.
So I don't necessarily buy that argument, that the state makes it easy enough for you to just get out if you don't like it. I think you should have to try to work within the system, and that's why I struggle to even really define myself. I just call myself a libertarian. I guess I kind of a minarchist. I find the minarchist position to be the best one that blends the philosophical moral arguments with the reality on the ground, and the reality of what the average person wants, which is a feeling of security. And like I said, I can't envision a way in which we would have arbitration firms compete with each other. I think the chance of collusion and merger between security firms and arbitration firms in an anarcho society is inevitable. I think that's what history has shown. I can't fathom in what way they would compete within a geographic area. Now, if anarchy swept the globe, you may have a lot more, a larger amount of small states, for example, but they will still be states. You will not have a true anarchy society without a hierarchy.
Hey, let me ask you a question, and this just struck me as you were speaking. And on a personal note, we both have mentioned off air that we have some training in martial arts. What do you think it is about training in the use of force that makes you so apprehensive to use it. Because I find myself the same way. I don't believe that anybody, state or personal, should be forcing other people to do things. What do you think it is? Do you think that the training in martial arts, the training of applying force to another human being, gives us a more reality of what it actually is, or what?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I saw a study recently. I honestly can't reference the source right now. It said that the average man is 5,000 times less effective in a fight than he thinks he is. I thought that was pretty good, especially
5,000 times.
5,000 times. I've
Yeah.
seen, so as someone who trains in jiu-jitsu, I've seen grown men, giant bodybuilders be tapped out by girls half their size.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen grown men get tapped out by 12-year-old boys. So you learn technique, you learn discipline, you learn humility. So important that
Yeah.
people have respect, and then when you develop that respect, when you're training in a martial art, and respect for people who are better than you can kick your ass on the mat, you learn to kind of stay in your lane. It kind of fits with the kind of minarchist or slash ANCAP philosophy of like, don't harm other people, but be ready to, defend yourself, defend your property, use force if necessary as the absolute last resort. But we should be, negotiating with, and you train in martial arts and you can be a great fighter, but still no match for a Tommy gun, right?
Yeah.
You're still no match.
Yeah.
A guy on the street pulls out a knife and you could be a brown belt and you could end up dead.
Yeah.
So you got to have respect, because we've developed weapons that are far greater than any martial art that's been developed, across the globe. And there's drones, fighter jets, nuclear weapons. We certainly aren't going to be able to
Destroy
armbar our way out of every situation.
Right. Have you heard of a fighter named Ramsey Dewey?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll be brief on this. He's a YouTuber, but he lives in Japan, and he's an MMA fighter. And he talks about he's been doing mixed martial arts for as long as you and I combined. 20 plus years. He's amazing. I mean, he's only 2 for 2 in MMA, but he's fighting at a professional level too. So that's not something to balk at. You can win one fight in professional MMA. You got something going on. But aside from that, he talks about knife training, and he has Krav Maga guys that want to come in and train with knives. And his contention has always been you can train all you want, but still 99 times out of 100, if your assailant has a knife and has any inclination about how to use it, you're going to get stabbed.
Yeah, I actually had a friend who trained in knife fighting, and he said his sensei, his instructor, told them that the best thing you can hope for if you ever get into a knife fight is that you both die.
Yeah.
So basically, even though he trained knife fighting, he was telling them, avoid it at all costs. Basically,
Yeah.
know what you're doing, but if you're going to get in a knife fight, you're going to get slashed, you're going to get stabbed.
And that's a great metaphor for government right there too.
Yeah.
Anyways, since we're talking about force and security, which seems to be the big point of contention in the role of government for minarchists and anarchists, where do minarchists stand on the idea of the draft, considering the draft is probably one of the greatest violations of a person's individual rights and freedoms? But if you have a security apparatus and needing to engage in self-defense, where do my freedoms start and where do they end in that society?
Well, I think that to some degree, like I said, there is going to be an accumulation of money, resources for these security agents. People always want to do this work. We don't have too much trouble hiring police officers right now. The military does a decent job recruiting. And I think that's where it's minarchy, not anarchy. I don't think that we're ever going to have a system where everyone's 100% voluntary. There's always going to be the one asshole who's like, I don't want to pay for any of this shit. Like, I want to live here. I want all the privileges of living here. I want to, these roads to be safe. And I think that's the other thing with security. It's like, at what point is your liberty going to be deemed too dangerous? Can you get high on meth and drive 90 miles an hour in a residential area? Now, you can talk philosophically about that all you want, but the people in that community are going to get together. They're going to want somebody to use force to stop somebody from getting that high on drugs and from driving dangerously when kids are playing, for example, out in the street in like a residential area. And that's just the reality of it. You can talk about automation, you can talk about security, but there is a point where somebody is always going to do something destructive. People always have those tendencies. We can build up these wonderful systems. what's the saying? The society is, 100 miles wide, but only a mile deep. Something like that.
Interesting.
All right. So basically, what you're saying is that you acknowledge and recognize that a draft system would need to exist inside of a
I
monarchic
think
society.
last case resort. Last case resort, definitely. I
Come
don't
again?
think that. I think it would be a last case resort. I don't think we would need
Yeah,
it.
last case.
Yeah, I think people like I said, they would be financially incentivized in a given geographic area. They would collect revenue. Look, if you want to live in this area, you need to give money to these people who are going to defend you, who are going to run arbitration, people who have been trained legally. And a lot of people might criticize me here and say, look, you're basically just recreating the state we have now. And I think one of the biggest differences is how much the state gets involved in everyday life. And I think with a lot of the regulations, I think a lot of the environmental issues will be able to be minimized through increased knowledge, through increased technological innovations. We're going to have cleaner energy and things like that. Um, but like I said, I think the part of security specifically and resolving conflict, even just if you and I got in a fist fight, for example, and we both paid different security firms, well, why the hell would I listen to the ruling of your security firm? And
Mhm.
why would my security firm hand me over? So that to me, and they can go to different arbitration that we all accept and that we all pay for, but then that arbitration is just the state of that area. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what it is.
All right. So, following up on that, as to why people would agree or consent, it's worthwhile to get into concepts such as the social contract and constitutionalism. Do monarchists believe that a constitution would be necessary to establish like a baseline for how society is to act and conduct themselves and guidelines for how laws must be brought in? Or is that too much government already by merit of say, hey, we already a big father figure telling us no, 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 or yes, but do it this way.
Yeah, see, I don't buy the social contract argument. I guess this is where I agree with ANCAPs and some of the other libertarians. I didn't sign anything when I grew up here. I mean, there's ridiculous laws where it says you can't collect the rainwater. Now, obviously, they're referring to large corporations collecting the rainwater, but the fact that I could be arrested for going in my backyard and pulling out a pot and filling it with rainwater, it's absurd, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, well, by choosing to live here, agree to the social contract. The social contract then gives the states these powers to create these laws. Well, when I was a kid, I didn't vote on those things. Those laws had been on the books in some cases before I was even born. For example, certain regulations that are like completely cumbersome, completely absurd. I mean, there are so many different legal and financial laws. You have to hire somebody to just comb through the laws to make sure you're not a criminal when you're, going through taxes or dealing with different financial institutions, for example. There's all kinds of different legal laws, and I think in a minarchist society it would be more contract based. I think kids up to a certain point would more or less have to put up with the rules of society until they become adults, and then they can choose to sign contracts within that given area and have them spelled out for them. I think that's the other problem is they say ignorance of the law is no excuse here in the United States. And I find that argument to be absurd because our kids aren't taught the laws. They're
Right.
taught some of the laws: don't murder, don't steal, don't assault people, don't sexually assault or rape people. They're taught the big, horrible laws, but financial laws, various laws about different regulations with corporations, with finance. Kids don't know these things.
Right.
They
And
grow up.
those. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that's pretty much it.
I was just
That's
going to say, in those types of laws, those finely worded, minute laws that are blue collar crimes and stuff, and they cater to people with higher IQs. What if you're somebody who's not very intelligent, who's just trying to get through life and happen to have come across some success with your hard work, and now you're going to commit blue collar crimes because you don't know that you can't do these things. Well, there's a fair amount of people that I would bet end up in jail for that, or at least end up losing their wealth.
Oh,
A lot of
absolutely.
Yeah,
a
And
lot of
those people didn't sign the social contract. They didn't sign anything. They didn't agree
yeah,
to these laws. They didn't agree to that. So that's what I mean. I think
yeah.
there will be hierarchy within a minarchy or more libertarian society. I think kids should have to listen to their parents to a certain age. You can argue about whether that's 16, 17, or 18. I'm not totally interested in that debate. But the point is, there will be a certain age where then they are told the rules of that society. They're given contracts. They can agree or disagree if they want the security apparatus. Now, the people who pay for that security apparatus may determine that if you don't want to sign that, you are deemed too dangerous, or you are deemed, unsecure in that area. I think that this is where some of the leftist arguments do take hold. I think there is a point to say, look, if someone's too poor to pay for a security apparatus, well, what are we going to do? Because the security apparatus is probably going to side with the people who pay them versus somebody who doesn't pay them. I think that's another reason for having one large apparatus that always collects funds, that they're going to get their money regardless. So again, I guess that's taxation. That is theft from a philosophical standpoint. But I don't see how you're going to get justice for those people who can't afford proper security. So I think that's why you're going to need one large apparatus, one large security firm that everyone agrees to, that is transparent, that people can come in and look. Those security apparatuses may come down too. Like the problem is right now we can't boycott our current court system and then get a new one. But I think ultimately there will only be one court system. So I'm fine with seeing court systems come and go and be abolished. But I think that we are inevitably going to see security apparatuses and arbitration firms naturally merge into one firm. They're going to merge or they're going to collaborate. I don't see them competing in the traditional free market sense that as other libertarians.
Alrighty, so let's move away from security. In the liberal mindset, there is a certain social responsibility to go ahead and educate the population and the populace as a whole so that they know what the rules are for society and the traditions that establish that society. What is the minarchist position on education? Privatization, or is it something where it's a public concern, so it must be taken care of by the public?
Yeah, I think generally private. I think, maybe some kind of voucher system would be fine temporarily until we can get more privatized systems for the schools. I think that there has to be some standards set by those security systems because, like we were talking about, somebody driving 90 miles an hour. Well, what if you can't read the signs? You can talk about driving on private roads, public roads, and have that debate. But ultimately, if somebody can't even read that the sign says drive 45 miles an hour or careful, there are kids in this area, if they can't even read those signs, then we should not allow them to get behind the wheel of a motor vehicle. I'm sorry if that, is too authoritarian for some libertarians, but I think just the argument of like the free market will resolve everything, let everyone do whatever they want is absurd. There will always be a few people that slip through the cracks, don't want to raise their kids, use a lot of drugs and want to get behind the wheel of the car. But yeah, I think generally speaking, private schools show better results, having competition between the schools with a baseline of standards, a basic understanding of mathematics, reading, writing, and English, a standardized language for that area so that people aren't dangerous to each other. Because, what liberty do you have if somebody's a risk to you and you can't even speak to them?
All right. So, ANCAPs and libertarians, they are generally relatively close, and it sounds like minarchists are just a flavor of libertarianism as a whole. So I'm going to go ahead and just cite a meme, and I want your take on it.
Okay.
What if the child consents, though?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's absurd. A child cannot consent.
All right. In a minarchist society, why can't they consent?
Because there's countless psychological literature on this about children who don't comprehend different situations. Children are easier to be exploited. They don't fully understand their needs, their desires. Their brains aren't fully developed. Even up till 16, 17 years old, and even 18 for some young boys, honestly, their minds aren't fully developed. They can't fully rationalize, especially before the age of 15, 16 years old. You know, children that young can't even rationalize. I think men and women who would be interested in doing things with kids that young have psychological illness. They need to be put in psychological institutions. They're a danger to society. And I'm sorry about their liberty, you know, but that's.
Are you though?
I mean, not really.
Okay, so I'm just making sure.
I would classify that type of person as a predator.
Oh yeah.
Predators
Right.
don't attack equals. They attack weaker prey.
There are people who have these feelings and who have not acted on them, and they should seek psychological help. You know, if it comes out, they should absolutely go through therapy. They, you know, and if it's deemed that they're too dangerous to society, if they can't be rehabilitated, then they have to be locked away, you know, for the safety of children.
So it comes back to security. So
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely, and again, that's another part of like the minarchist society. That the meme about the ANCAP thing is you could see within the ANCAP framework of how somebody might make that argument because it's complete anarchy. They're like, well, you know, you let people do whatever they want. Well, you know, somebody is going to touch a child, they deserve to be shot, in my opinion. You know, that's the end of their liberty.
I concur.
Yeah,
100%.
I'm more on the jail side, but I get the sentiment.
Well, I can understand where he comes from, the rage.
Like I said, if somebody has these feelings and has not acted on them, I'm not supposing that they be locked away or killed immediately. I think that those people need to be rehabilitated. If they can, they need to try to work through, you know, whatever psychological issues have led them. Unfortunately, a lot of the times, people that have these feelings towards kids, they were molested themselves. It's a vicious, you know, cycle. It's really sad. It's really unfortunate. And I think that, you know, if we can rehabilitate those people and they can, you know, expunge those feelings, repress those feelings, that's great. If we can't, if it's determined that these people are too far gone, you know, varies case by case, then those people have to be locked away. And if they've committed these acts again and again and can't even be locked up with people, you know, then it would at least be understandable why an angry father who, if his young kid was touched or molested or raped, you know, would want to end that person's life. I could understand that from even a non-aggression principle act of like, okay, you violated, you know, the sovereignty of somebody's being.
Right. Mr. Wittry, I really appreciate you coming on today. You've had some very valuable insights. Is there anything else you'd like to add today?
No, I think that's it. This was great.
I think it's been very insightful. Anything you want to plug?
No, that's all right.
Awesome.
Your guys.
It was wonderful having you,
man.
Yeah,
thanks for being here with us and chatting with us.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Bye-bye.